Started and want to welcome everyone here. We are going to continue our study of the book of Genesis. Today we will be in chapters 18 and 19 in Genesis for most of the time. So that's where we're going to be studying. Last week we'd covered the previous two chapters, chapters 16 and 17. And in chapter 17, some very significant things happen. God reiterates his covenant promise to Abram and changes his name to Abraham. So going from exalted father to father of a multitude, changes Sarai's name, princess, or my princess, to Sarah, just simply princess, and sort of broadening her, her reach. And then of course Isaac is born. And so the covenant of circumcision is established. So there's a lot that happened in the previous two chapters. So we're going to be in chapters 18 and 19 today. And so if you have your Bibles, feel free to turn with me to Genesis chapter 18, and I will read the first few verses. So Genesis 18, starting at verse 1. And the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree, while I bring a morsel of bread that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. So they said, do as you have said. And Abraham went quickly into the tent to Sarah and said, Quick, 3 seahs of fine flour, knead it and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to a young man who prepared it quickly. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. So this is the visit from these 3 men. We find out more about them in just a little bit in terms of who they are. It mentions in verse 1 that he's sitting at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. This is, again, in the climate that they're in. This is indicating that like the really hot time in the afternoon, and everyone is likely on a siesta, a break time. This is common, and you got to remember, in this time there's no air conditioning. So in the heat of the day is when Abraham sees these 3 men, these 3 visitors. And we, of course, know that they are angels, or 2 of them are angels, and one is the Lord himself. Abraham almost certainly does not know this at the time. He simply sees 3 men. And he goes, however, to demonstrate extravagant hospitality. Now, there's a certain element of this that is actually expected in the culture at the time, and frankly, in Middle Eastern culture today. In the Middle East, both in ancient culture and today, hospitality is very strongly emphasized. More strongly emphasized than it is in our culture. Our culture, we say we believe in hospitality, but in the Middle East, it is truly practiced. Like if a guest comes to your home, you feed them. And in fact, there's a lot of cultures around the world that put that kind of emphasis. But even accounting for that, Abraham goes above and beyond. As far as he's not just providing them with any food, he's providing with the best food. He's going through the effort of having it prepared properly. And he's doing what he's supposed to do. He is showing not just the hospitality that's minimally expected, but he is going over and above to 3 strangers, 3 visitors. And this is likely what the author of Hebrews had in mind when he wrote in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2, Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. So it is likely that this is at least partly what the author of Hebrews was referencing, because the readers of his letter would have caught would likely have thought about, oh, that's right, Abraham, he entertained angels unawares. And of course, later in the text, it becomes clear that it's God himself and 2 angels who are being entertained by Abraham. So definitely Quite interesting. Going on to verse 9. This is referring to the visitors, they said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" And he said, "She is in the tent." The Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I'm worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time next year, at the appointed time I'll return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied it, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. He said, "No, but you did laugh." So the text here explicitly says that this is the Lord who is speaking. This is, and again, most of your Bibles will, the way that the name of God is Yahweh, or some in English translations transliterated as Jehovah. Most of your Bibles have Lord in all caps. Whenever you see Lord in all caps, that is the YHWH. It's called the Tetragrammaton. That is the name of God. And so the Lord, Yahweh, said, so he's having a conversation with Abraham. And in all likelihood, this is one of the, and you see it several times in the Old Testament, a pre-incarnation visit of Jesus himself. And so God appears in human form. Jesus is speaking to Abraham and is saying that Sarah, your wife, is going to have a son. And it says here that Sarah laughs. And it's kind of understandable because it says here that the way of women had ceased to be upon her. Now, that's a euphemism. There was euphemisms back then. We use euphemisms now. It's referring her menstrual cycle. She no longer had her menstrual cycle. That's what it's saying. But it's just the literal text here says that the way of women had ceased to be upon her. And so she laughs to herself. And then she's saying, after worn out, my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? And then it says, the Lord says to him, like, why did Sarah laugh? God knows her inmost thoughts. He knows that she laughed. And again, if you remember last week in chapter 17, the reference to Abraham laughing to himself. And so now we see Sarah doing it. And then, of course, God essentially confronts Sarah by saying that, that you laughed. And she's saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh. So again, a good reminder that God knows our innermost thoughts, and it would have been intimidating to her, no doubt about it. Go on to verse 16. I'll go over this part here, and then we'll open up to some comments and questions. Then the men set out from there, and they looked down toward Sodom. And Abraham went down with them to set them on their way. The Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him? For I have chosen him, that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him. Then the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know. So the story continues where Abraham goes with the three men, and they look down upon, and as they're preparing to depart. And it's interesting in verse 17 where it says, the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what am I about to do? Who is God talking to here? Now, there's an interesting book that I read over the summer by Tim Chaffee, I believe his name is. He works for Answers in Genesis, and it's actually all about the Nephilim, because remember we talked about the Nephilim in Genesis chapter 6. And Chaffee actually makes a pretty solid case that the Bible, in multiple occasions, references a divine council. In other words, God and the angels, and that there are actually discussions that happen, and that we often miss this. And sort of, it was very interesting when I was reading the book there, because he gave this as an example, but also even elsewhere, in the book of Job, in terms of the sons of God, like presenting themselves and all that, and this idea of a divine council that God speaks, to the angels and such. So I thought that was interesting. Anyway, so God's is saying, shall I hide from Abraham? And no, I'm not going to hide from him, because Abraham is going to be a great and mighty nation. He should know about this. I have chosen him. And so God says, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, their sin is grave, I'm going to go down to see whether they have done altogether. And now the way that this is stated here, one might think, does this indicate that God has limited knowledge? Is this, and there are some Christian scholars who will make this argument, they call themselves open theists. They believe that God limits his knowledge of future free choices. I don't hold that view myself. I think it's simpler to understand this as just simply God is using anthropomorphic language. Similar to when Moses asks to see God's face, and then God is saying, you can't see me in my full glory, but I'll turn and you can see my back parts. I don't think it's actually literally seeing God's physical back parts. I think it's a way of saying you'll see, part of me. You'll see enough that you're able to handle, but not beyond. And so similarly here, I think that this is anthropomorphic language, accommodating the fact that, yes, God is going to do his due diligence. He's going to look and see, but of course, he already knows the answer. Just like you knew the answer when you asked Adam where he was and what have you done and all that. I mean, God already knew the answer. As parents, as I've explained, we do this with our own kids all the time. We ask them questions we know the answer to. As a teacher, I do this all the time. In politics, I'll make a quick political reference. When you're in question period, if you watch question period, you never ever ask a question to the government you don't know the answer to already. I mean, that's just kind of basic politics 101. So this idea of asking questions you already know the answer to, this is not a radical idea. So just before I go on, I'll pause there for a moment. Any comments or questions? Okay, well then I will go on. Let's go to verse 22. So the men turned from there and went towards Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. Then Abraham drew near and said, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? And the Lord said, if I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake. So at this point in the story, the two other men have left, and we'll pick up what happens with those two men in the next chapter, because we see them in Sodom. But now Abraham is standing before the Lord. So why am I pretty confident in saying that these three men that appeared to Abraham were God himself and two angels? Because that's how the text describes it, that two of the three men leave. Now Abraham is standing before the Lord, and he is having a direct personal conversation with God in human form. And Abraham is interceding for Sodom. Why would he intercede for Sodom? Because he knows who's there. Remember his nephew Lot. Lot had separated from him back in chapter 13, and Lot had chosen to go settle near Sodom and then moved into Sodom itself. And so Abraham undoubtedly is thinking about Lot and interceding on his behalf. And so Abraham then says, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? And he says, what if there's just 50 righteous people there? Now, why the number 50? Well, the scholars have some different explanations for this. Here's one. One explanation that's been suggested is that, at that time, 100 would be like a small city. Remember, cities were much smaller back then. So if 100 is a small city, then 50 is half of that. So then 50 would be symbolic of about half the population. So that's one theory that was suggested, is that Abraham is kind of starting with, let's say about half of them are righteous. That's possible, but I think a more likely explanation is the one that I think more commentators tend to take. I think Abraham was doing some quick math in his head, and was going, okay, Lot, his wife, they're probably married, maybe there's some kids, servants. Have we got at least 50 right? He's probably sort of going, have we got 50 righteous people among Lot and his family and his servants? I think it's entirely possible that he's thinking along that line. And and you see here, he's speaking very boldly to God. And he's saying, that will you sweep away the 50 righteous? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked. Far be that from you. This is bold stuff here. Abraham is challenging God. And this is how much of the Bible reads, by the way. Read the Psalms, and you'll see the writers wrestling with their real questions and real frustrations. It is okay as believers to question God. Abraham did it. You see it in the Psalms. These are our examples of prayers, and you see some serious questioning here. And Abraham is questioning. He's asking. Of course, he doesn't stop here, and this is where this gets kind of interesting. Verse 27. Abraham answered and said, Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. Again he spoke to him and said, Suppose 40 are found there. He answered, For the sake of 40 I will not do it. And then he said, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there. He answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. He said, Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. He answered, For the sake of 20 I will not destroy it. And then he said, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again but this once. Suppose 10 are found there. He answered, For the sake of 10 I will not destroy it. And the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. So it's a fascinating back and forth where Abraham is essentially negotiating with God. What a bold thing to do, where he asks God, if there's 50 righteous, will you spare the city? And God says, yes, I'll spare it for the sake of 50. And then Abraham's, I think I can get a better deal. I think we can negotiate this down. He'd actually be a decent salesperson here. This is good strategy. Because you'll notice when he goes to 45, you'll notice he doesn't say, what if it's just 45? Because that sounds kind of crass. And so he's like, after, of course, saying how he's dust of the earth and all that, and then he says, suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. You see what he's doing here? He's like, instead of going, well, what about 45? He's saying, what if you're just missing 5? You've already said, God, you'll spare the city for the 50. But you're not going to destroy the city because we're lacking 5 from the 50, right? And then God's like, I will not, I will, and you know how God's answer is very straightforward. I won't destroy it if I find 45 there. So God says the number, okay, 45. And then Abraham, 40. And then, okay, 40, I'll spare 30, 20, and then he goes down to 10. Now, if you leave out the parts where Abraham is sort of saying let not the Lord be angry. If you leave that section out and just go to the parts where he's making his case, in the Hebrew, he's actually using few words each time in making his case. He kind of knows that he's pushing it. So he goes from this big, long speech making his case for sparing the 50 righteous down to just like a couple words what about 10? Where he sort of goes down to that number. It indicates his trepidation before God. He knows this is a bold thing he's doing. Now, why 10? The number 10 is used in Jewish tradition as a symbol of the idea of minimum. In fact, the number 10 later is actually represented by the yod, which is the smallest letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So, for example, in Matthew 5:18, which I will just quote here, in Matthew 5:18, Jesus says, For truly I say to you, Until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. And I believe the word, in the Greek word, which is translated a dot, there's your smallest, tiniest human letter, Hebrew letter, and that's the number 10. And so it's really, really small. Later in Judaism, as the religion, 10 becomes the minimum required for a worshiping community, a minyan. And so 10's your minimum. And so again, a lot of that stems from this story here. 10 is the Jewish minimum. Why doesn't Abraham go lower than 10? Who knows? I mean, maybe he was sort of doing the math in his head and going, okay, lots. He's got to be a decent enough witness that he's got 10 righteous people. I mean, come on. Maybe he's used the tricks of evangelism well enough that he's good. Or maybe he was just like, I can't push it any farther. Or just 10 just seemed like a nice round number to end off with. But this is a good reminder to us of that it is okay to have honest conversations with God and to push, and that also it's a reminder that God cares about individuals, and that Abraham is exactly right. Far be it from you to destroy the righteous with the wicked, to just lump in saying, well, you've got all these people that are wicked, too bad for the righteous, you're getting the exact same punishment. That's not how God works. And we see that as we'll go into the next chapter shortly here, where it actually, even though there's less than 10 righteous in Sodom, God still gets the handful of righteous, gets them out before destroying the city. I'll pause there for a moment. Comments or questions? Yes. Yep, absolutely. This is the exact kind of chapter. If you're an open theist, and if you hold that God's knowledge of the future is limited, and again, to be fair to open theists, if you're just an open theist, Greg Boyd is kind of is one person, a theologian who's very well known for advocating open theism. Open theists, what they do is they'll go to the narrative passages and largely to make their case. So you'll see it here. You see it, they'll make the case in Genesis 3 that God actually did not know that Adam and Eve would eat the forbidden fruit. And so, he had hoped they wouldn't, but they do. They would also make the case that, in Genesis chapter 6, when God regretted creating mankind, that things did not go the way that he wanted. So the challenge with open theism is that they make their argument from the narrative cases and sort of go hyper-literal in that, but I don't think they take proper account of just the overwhelming textual evidence within the Bible of God's knowledge of all things, including future free choices. I mean, case in point, where it's prophesied that Jesus was going to be betrayed by one of his disciples for exactly 30 pieces of silver. That's a very specific. Think of all the future free choices that would be involved in making sure Judas comes along to do the betrayal at the exact time. And yet that was prophesied hundreds of years before. So now open theists will respond by saying that, well, God, when he wants to make something happen, he can just intervene and make it happen. Sure, yes, but then you're overriding free will quite a bit in order to do that, and open theists are trying to preserve human free will by advocating that perspective. So anyway, yes, if you look at only some of these narrative passages, open theism becomes you can certainly make a reasonable case for it. I just think it runs into problems with just another example. When Peter says, I will never deny you, Jesus, I'll go die with you. And Jesus says, before the rooster crows, you'll deny me 3 times. Okay, that seems to require some level of direct foreknowledge of Peter's future free choices. He's to know that it's going to happen exactly 3 times before the rooster crows. That's more than just a lucky guess. So on the whole, I don't think that open theism stands the biblical text. That being said, I mention it because there are Christian scholars who hold that view, and they do make their case, and it's interesting to sort of look at some of their explanations. Other comments or questions? And I will just add that the traditional view of God having perfect foreknowledge, I have no trouble reconciling that with chapter 18 here. I mean, again, I just accept that God uses anthropomorphic language because it happens regularly in the Bible where it's written in sort of a form that we can better understand, and God will sort of descend to our level so that way we're able to comprehend. I mean, in fact, that's kind of how the whole Bible works. It's written at a level that, where God can interact with us. I mean, the idea of Jesus, the incarnation, is God coming down in human form and limiting himself so that he can interact with us.
What about the fact that in this story he says, when I come back in a year, you'll have a son?
Yep. And that's as far as like his knowledge of that Sarah would have the son. Yeah, I mean, now there, to defend open theists there, obviously the way that happens is God supernaturally intervenes, and God knew what he's going to do. And so, yeah, that particular point you can fit in either open theism or traditional theism. So even though I don't hold to open theism, I don't think it's correct, but I don't want to typecast or to present it in a way that's like really weak and all that, because they do have their case. I just don't think it's correct. Okay, well, let's go on to Genesis 19, starting with verse 1. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth and said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way." They said, "No, we will spend the night in the town square." But he pressed them strongly. So they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. So we see, first of all, in chapter 19, it explicitly says we've got two angels here. So we had three men. One of them is Yahweh, God himself. Two of them are angels. The two angels go to Sodom, and I suspect you've noticed the parallel with how Lot deals with his visitors and how Abraham dealt with his. They both show extravagant hospitality. And Lot, he's in Sodom. He knows what Sodom is like. And so he sees these men, and he's like, "Come with me, spend the night at my place, and I'll feed you." And they're like, "No, we'll spend the night in the town square." And it says that he pressed them strongly. He knows this is Sodom. That's a really bad idea. Like, pick your worst city, the worst location. I won't bother naming because I'll get in trouble. But pick your worst location in the worst city, and imagine you've got two visitors that say, "Yeah, I'm just going to hang out here for the night." And Lot is like, "No way. You come with me." And you know what that tells us about Lot? He has not forgotten the basics of hospitality. In fact, we know even a little more about him, because I'm going to go to 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 6 to 8, where we actually get a little bit of a glimpse at Lot's inner thoughts here, where Peter is speaking here in 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 6 to 8. "If by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. And if he rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over the lawless deeds that he saw and heard." Lot was a righteous man. It's explicitly stated to this in the text here in the New Testament. So we know that Lot was not personally participating in the wickedness in Sodom. So it's kind of, this seems kind of odd to us that, like, we know for sure that he's a righteous man, yet he made the choices that he did. Definitely kind of interesting. I will suggest, and here I'll connect a little bit to Pastor Kelby's sermon today, which I thought was really good, where Kelby was talking about, one of the things that we need to do as believers is maximize God's influence and minimize the world's influence. Lot is, I would suggest, the ultimate example of someone who did the exact reverse, where he set himself up for the worst possible situation. He chooses to live in the worst possible place, and let's be blunt, he's not going there for the purpose of being a missionary and evangelizing. He's going because he thinks, hey, it's a nice city, it's comfortable and all that, and even though he knows about how bad it is and how he's surrounded by wickedness, And it was bothering him. It tormented his righteous soul. You'll notice he didn't actually do anything about, okay, maybe I should take my family out of here. Maybe we should, he doesn't actually do anything. He allows the world, to have maximum influence on him, and he minimizes God's influence. And here's the good news. God doesn't forget about him. Even though he's a righteous man, he does have faith, because otherwise he wouldn't be described in this way. Because, without faith, it's impossible to please God. And Lot is a righteous man, but also a deeply imperfect one. And so, definitely kind of interesting. Now, let's go on to verse 4. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them." Lot went out to the men at the entrance, shut the door after him, and said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have known 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." But they said, "Stand back." And they said, "This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." Then they pressed hard against the man Lot, and drew near to break the door down. But the men reached out their hands, and brought Lot into the house with them, and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great, so that they wore themselves out groping for the door. So, if there's any doubt as to how bad were things in Sodom, this is really bad. Because in contrast to Lot, who is a righteous man, and a righteous man knows that when you have visitors, you treat them with respect, you treat them well, this is what hospitality is to look like. The men of Sodom, and the text says, all the people to the last man surround the house, and they say, "Bring these men out that we may know them." That's a euphemism for having sexual relations. And so what they're proposing is essentially a gang rape. When you contrast this with the ancient Near East emphasis on hospitality, you see just how depraved things are. It's really, really bad. So in contrast to the hospitality that Lot is showing and that Abraham had showed his visitors, you see these men are proposing a depraved act, horrendously depraved. And this is not all, by the way, in terms of Sodom's sin. No question there's sexual sin here, but it's not just that. And I'll prove that to you. I'm going to go to Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49. Because the depravity of Sodom and Gomorrah went beyond sexual sin. We focus on the sexual sin, but it's not just that. So Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49, where the prophet Ezekiel says, let me just find it here. Okay, my pages are stuck. Okay, Ezekiel 49, 16 verse 49 says, "Behold, this was the way," actually verse 48 and 49, just to get the context. "As I live, declares the Lord God, your sister Sodom and her daughters have not done as you and your daughters have done. Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. So they were haughty and an abomination before me. So I removed them when I saw it." Now that's not all of Sodom's sins, but that's just another component of it. So you've got horrendous sexual sin, and you have pride, excess of food, prosperous ease, not caring about the poor and needy. So you see that things are just really, really bad in Sodom. And again, the author in Genesis, Moses, is making it clear that all the men have surrounded, it's everyone. The city as a whole is totally depraved. Now, in the New Testament, in Jude verse 7, because again, there are some who will argue that Sodom was not about sexual sin at all. No, because Jude makes that clear in Jude verse 7 that sexual immorality is a key part of Sodom's sin. just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. And so the sin in Sodom is really bad. Sexual immorality and greed and pride and just and I believe actually Kelby had mentioned in his sermon about pride being like one of the worst sins. But of course, it's not the only sin. So it's a total level of wickedness. Now, this brings us to Lot's response, where Lot's like, "Don't do this." Okay, so he starts out well. He's absolutely right. Don't do this. This is, don't act so wickedly. Yes, he's right. But his method of, I've got 2 daughters who haven't known a man, and that's a reference, they're virgins. They have not had sex. I'll toss them out to you. Do what you want to them. That's bad, obviously. And that can't be defended. What Lot here is doing is he is trying to defend his visitors, and he's so focused on the need for hospitality and protecting his visitors, he's willing to throw his daughters out. Again, fortunately, he doesn't actually do it. The angels intervene so that this doesn't have to happen. But it just shows that, obviously, it's a terrible thing to offer. So as Christians, we don't have to defend that. The narrative is telling us what happened. It doesn't say that everything Lot did was righteous. That was not a righteous thing for him to do. By the way, this story here of Lot offering his 2 daughters, the Israelites later do the exact same thing. Last couple chapters in the book of Judges, I don't have the reference right with me, but again, if you want to read some real depravity, read the last 5 chapters in Judges. Similar story, same kind of scenario, where you've got a man in his house with a visitor, and this time it was the Israelites from this tribe that surrounded, and were like, bring out this man that we may know him. The exact same thing. And he says, I'll give you my concubine instead. And this time he actually threw her out, and she was raped and died. And so, and no doubt, when reading those last couple, when anyone who would read those last couple chapters of Judges would be thinking about the sin of Sodom here, because the parallels are quite striking. So anyway, the angels intervene by striking the men who have surrounded the house with blindness, and so they intervene supernaturally. I'll go to verse 12, and then in just a bit we'll open up some comments and questions. Then the men said to Lot, actually, before I read that, I want to point one other thing. In terms of this thing about Lot being a righteous man, it's easy to miss here. Notice how he says, my daughters have not known any man. He actually had enough of an influence on them that they had not participated. So his family had actually not participated in the sexual immorality, so again, going back to, he is a righteous man, he's just really bad at it, the best way to put it. Verse 12, then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of this place, for we're about to destroy this place, because the outcry against this people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. So Lot here is told by the 2 angels, tell everyone you know, it's that anyone in your family, to get out of the city. The city is going to be destroyed. And so Lot, and again, he's a righteous man. He believes the Lord. And so he goes to his sons-in-law, or soon-to-be sons-in-law, and he says, we got to get out of here. And their response is, no, we don't actually take this seriously. And if you do the math here, you'll notice that we're not getting up to 10 righteous. So we basically, as we'll see, we've got Lot, his wife, kind of, and then his 2 daughters. So we're at 4 that he's able to get out. Going on to verse 15. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him. And they brought him out and set him outside the city. And as they brought them out, one said, escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. And Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lords. Behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved?" He said to him, "Behold, I grant you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing till you arrive there." Therefore, the name of the city was called Zoar. So you can see that Lot is lingering. He wants to do the right thing, but he doesn't have it in him to rush out of the city. And yet, in God's mercy, the angels sees him and his wife and his 2 daughters and say, "We've got to get out of here." And so they're told, "You are to run, you're to escape, don't look back, keep going." And then you see Lot do something similar to what Abraham did. He negotiates. And except his negotiation isn't for, he's not looking out for others. In this case, he's looking out for himself. And so they tell him to go to the hills, and Lot is like, "No, I can't do that. That's too far. It's too difficult. But there's this city that's nearby. It's just a little city, just a little itty-bitty city. Can't I just go there?" And the angels relent and say, "You can go there, but I can't." It says, "But go there quickly. I can't do anything until you arrive there." Again, God is not going to destroy the righteous with the wicked, even if the righteous is as conflicted as Lot. Now, what's this whole thing about it's just a little city? Here's what some of the commentators said. I think this is an interesting way of understanding it, because it seems sort of odd. Why is he emphasizing it's a little city? It's a little city. There's no indication anywhere in the text that Zoar is any better than Sodom and Gomorrah. It's possible it might not have been quite as bad, but there's no indication that it's any better. Probably what he's referencing here is that there's just a few people there, so there's less sin. If you do the math, Sodom's a big city, and they got lots of sin. So can't it go to the little city with just a little bit of sin in it, because there's just not as many people to sin? It's kind of an interesting way of looking at it. And yet, God meets where he's at, because Lot is clearly, at that point, not going to go to the hills. And in his mercy, he grants his request to go to Zoar. Now, he doesn't stay there, as we'll see in just a little bit. But there you have it. Okay, I'll pause there for a moment. Comments and questions? Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Mm. Okay, so the question is just is sort of where do we as Christians draw the line when you have people that are in sin and openly so, and how do we interact? And because you have some texts in the Bible that talk about fleeing from wickedness, stay as far away as you can, and you have others, and you have the example of Jesus himself, who hung out with sinners and who actually witnessed directly to them, and they were actually drawn to him. There is no simple answer on that, but what I would suggest is that, we look to Jesus as our ultimate example. And so Jesus clearly taught, and clearly by example showed, that the approach as Christians is not to sort of go seclude ourselves and try to hide from anyone who's bad, because then he says we're the light of the world. City on a hill can't, light on a hill can't be hidden, and all that. We're a city on a hill. So we need to be in the world. But it also says we're to be in the world, but not of it. And so the short answer here would be that Like, what is your motivation? Like, what is, in terms of why are you, like, among these people or this group or whatever, and what is the context? Like, there's a big difference between, let's say you've got a coworker, and that they have a lifestyle that's very different from yours. Well, that's going to happen. Of course it's going to happen. In a secular workplace, which most of us have secular jobs, we're going to work with people, for people, or have people work for us that are that have very different lifestyles in any number of different ways. I don't think the solution is, well, okay, I have to quit my job and go hide in my basement. That's not the right approach. I think that as Christians, we need to be clear about what we stand, and at the same time, show love for people and yeah, I mean, I guess that, so the default is that no, I don't think that we need to be, living in such a way that we're actively hiding from people who are non-Christians. Now, I will say it's a bit of a long answer, but it's a big question. The answer is very different when we're talking about within a church setting. Like, when you're within church and you're talking about someone who's professing to be a Christian and be a believer, the standard goes way up, way up. And the Apostle Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. There was a situation where you had a man who was sleeping with his father's wife, I believe is who it was. And Paul's saying, like, what are you guys doing? Like, kick him out of the church. That's the only way he's going to realize that he's doing anything wrong. Kick him out. And so when you're dealing with that kind of context, the expectations go way up. But when we're out in the world and we're interacting with people, then we need to have our witness and be clear about where we stand, but we also don't need to hide from people that are that have different lifestyles, different beliefs, and all that. Because if we hide from them, then they'll never hear the gospel. So there's no formula here. I mean, Christianity we don't really do formulas. So it's really about there's a certain amount of discernment involved. But just remember, Jesus, the way he lived, he never compromised, obviously, in terms of his lifestyle and what he did, but he's hung out with sinners a lot. But he did it way better than Lot. Lot is not our example. Lot did badly here. Like, this is if you're looking at how not to do it, Lot's approach where you just go there and basically hide just sort of have everyone just kind of assume you're one of them, but just personally don't do it, but nothing else. Yeah, Lot didn't handle it very well, but he's not our example. Jesus is. But fair question. Other comments or questions? Yeah, I think it was. I think that because it says here that that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. So yeah, I think that God actually responded to Lot's request. Similar to God responding to Abraham's request when we're going down from 50, 40, and all the way down to 10. So yeah, I think otherwise there's a good chance that Zoar would have been destroyed.
Any significance in emphasizing the hastiness of them preparing the meal?
Yeah, is there any significance? The question is in terms of emphasizing the hastiness of preparing the meal. Like, are you talking about in the first three verses here?
Well, with Lot and with Abraham, like it mentions, baked unleavened bread.
And they did so quickly. Yeah, I think it's actually emphasizing their hospitality. That, like, let's do this, let's go. And I mean, with Abraham, you see extravagant hospitality, and so he's like, we got to move on this. Like, this is important. And I think Lot is doing something similar here. So yeah, both Abraham and Lot are righteous men. It's just that Abraham lived it out a little better than Lot. Okay, I'll go on to verse 23. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife became behind him, looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley. And he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. So there's a lot of speculation about how were Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed. I'm not an expert on this. I know there's a lot of different theories. There's, the meteorite, volcano, some other like just plain supernatural fire from heaven. I don't know which one's correct. There are some scholars who've got some interesting theories on that. I haven't dived into it deeply enough to say, okay, here's a theory that I think is right. In any case, the cities are destroyed, and it says that Lot's wife turned back, became a pillar of salt. Yeah, what is that saying there? I've seen some that have argued that she was dawdling, and then she got hit by like a wave of lava and was turned into a fossil. I've seen others that she was literally turned into literal salt. Again, I don't know which one it is, or if it's some other explanation. But in any case, it's a reminder not to linger, because later in the New Testament you see the statement, "Remember Lot's wife." Now, there's some significant visual imagery in here, where if you look specifically at verse 28, where it says that he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley, and he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. This imagery of total destruction is referenced multiple times throughout the Bible. This destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah gets referenced a lot in both the Old Testament and in the New Testament. We looked at two examples earlier. I'll just go back to them briefly, just keeping in mind what was said here. 2 Peter chapter 2, where Peter says that by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. So in terms of judgment on unbelievers in the end, Sodom and Gomorrah are referenced as this is what it looks like. Again, not precisely, but this is an example. Jude verse 7, we read that before, talking about Sodom and Gomorrah, says, "Serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire." So the fire that consumed Sodom and Gomorrah could not be quenched. It could not be put out. And so you go to Revelation chapter 14, verse 11, where you'll see it says, "And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, those worshipers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name." And again, you see this smoke going up, rising up. This imagery of smoke going up from the destruction is referenced many times. And again, I could have used more, but about 5-6 years ago at Stomach Bible College, we did a course on different views on hell, and so we actually spent a fair bit of time looking at this imagery. It's quite interesting. And again, it's a classic example of you need to know your Old Testament to understand the New Testament, because this imagery of smoke rising up and using Sodom and Gomorrah as an example of what will happen to the ungodly, the destruction that happened to them, is similar to the fate that awaits unbelievers. This is what the text seems to be saying. In verse 29, it says that, verse 30, where it says, "God remembered Abraham and sent Lot." This word, remembering them. Remember, same thing when during the flood, God remembered Noah. It doesn't mean that God had forgotten. It simply means that God acted. He did something. And so he remembered Abraham and Lot. Abraham, he had that conversation with Lot. He dragged him out and saved his life, even though Lot clearly didn't deserve it. Going on to verse 30. "Now Lot went up out of Zoar and lived in the hills with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So he lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, 'Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come in to us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father.' So they made their father drink wine that night. And the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she arose. The next day, the firstborn said to the younger, 'Behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father.' So they made their father drink wine that night also. And the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day. Okay, so this isn't a great ending for Lot here. I mean, this is the last time that we see him in the narrative. It's actually quite pathetic. You'll notice that he goes to Zoar and he's like afraid to live there, probably because he's worried that city's going to be destroyed too. And so he ends up going to the hills anyway. And he's living with his daughters, and they conspire to get him to impregnate them. Like, there's no way to gloss over this here. This is really bad. And Lot has gone through all this effort to shield his daughters from the sexual immorality that was in Sodom, and then this happens. And Lot, he doesn't willingly participate in the sexual immorality. It says he was not aware, but he obviously willingly participates in the getting drunk. And in any case, this is just really bad. I mean, so there's no way to excuse this here. And it has a bad result in the end. If you recognize the names of the kids here, the two sons, Moab and Ben-Ami, the Moabites and the Ammonites end up becoming some of the greatest enemies of the Israelites. So what a sad, pathetic ending for Lot. It's a really bad way for his story to end. That's the man, by the way, that Peter describes as a righteous man whose soul was tormented by all the lawless deeds around him. Based on what Peter says in 2 Peter chapter 2, you know what that means? In all likelihood, we'll get to chat with Lot in heaven. In all likelihood, he's there. I mean, I don't know how to read the text any other way. And yet, he's really, kind of the ultimate example of one who's saved as though escaping through the flames. So in terms of a couple quick points of application, then we'll open up to comments and questions. Obviously, compromising with sin leads to tragic consequences. Lot is the ultimate example, and this fits very well with what Kelby was talking about this morning, that if you're sort of going halfway with sin and just sort of being in the world and kind of maximizing its influence on you, this is how you can be righteous in the sense that you believe in God and have faith, and yet your life gets totally messed up and you're a horrible example. I mean, Lot is our textbook case here of how not to lead, sort of your believer's life. And yet, by all accounts, based on what Peter says in particular, he's a righteous man. And God, intentionally spared him because he didn't want to destroy the righteous with the wicked. So the good news is that even if we're as conflicted as Lot, with the faith as small as a mustard seed, it seems it is, God still intervenes and will save. But I don't think any of us would look at this and go, okay, well, if Lot was good, then no, I don't think any of us are reading this and going, yeah, okay, this is a horrible ending. So don't be like Lot. And then a second point of application, it's not wrong to be honest with God, to discuss things with God. You see that with Abraham here. So we don't need to sort of couch our prayers with, well, I better make sure that I'm not saying anything that, no, it's Abraham is bold. You see it in the Psalms, they're bold. It is okay for us to be bold. When you're going through hardships, you don't have to pretend it's okay. So I will stop there. Any comments or questions? Yeah, good question. Would Lot's wife have been considered righteous? Peter didn't specifically reference her either good or bad. My guess is probably, because she was fleeing the city, and so yeah, but probably a righteous person who just didn't flee fast enough. So I don't know I'm not as confident on that one as I was Lot. Again, the 2 Peter passage convinces me that Lot's in heaven, but his wife, I think so, but I can't be as definitive on it. So, yeah. Yep, it's certainly possible. So the question is, could it be like the lingering as she's actually turning back and going back? Yep, it could be. So in that case, and perhaps she wasn't leaving willingly and she wanted to be in the city of sin and she wasn't righteous, and that's certainly possible. So I cannot be definitive on Lot's wife. I can't be definitive on Lot either, but I don't think Peter would have written it what he did if Lot wasn't actually a righteous man. So. And there's enough here with Lot about his hospitality and his really lousy way, but it's still his attempt to preserve his guests from what they were trying to do, that he had a kernel of righteousness in him. Yes.
Makes me think of like Hebrews 11:12, that the hallway of faith,
Yep.
Jephthah and Samson, like they're men of faith,
Yep.
and yet they did suffer the consequences. They considered, right?
Yeah, the point that Yvonne's making is that yes, in Hebrews chapter 11, and you have the heroes of faith chapter where you have Samson, Jephthah, and most of the people on that list had some really serious flaws, like really bad. Like Samson, not exactly a model that we want to sort of tell our young people as to who you should be like and all that. Like we gloss over that. Jephthah, I mean, he sacrificed his daughter. That's pretty bad. Gideon. We talk about Gideon leading his 300 to victory and all that, but the very next chapter, he makes like this ephod, and he turns into this big idol, and it says this thing became a sin. It snared the people of Israel. Gideon wasn't so great either. You go through, and Barak, he only went to battle because Deborah had to sort of tell him, okay, come on, get up and go. You got to do this. So, again, I go back to, remember what Jesus says, that if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can move mountains. And so God works with people who we are and where they're at, and amazing things happen through very imperfect people. So, which is good, because that means amazing things can happen with us too. And so I'd be much more concerned if all these individuals are presented as completely perfect in every way. Then I'd be going like, there is no hope. Like, forget it. I can't do what any of these guys did. But yeah, I mean, when you look at their weaknesses and all that, we actually can do what they did, and we can avoid some of the stuff they did too. So, yeah. Okay, I'm just past 12, so I'll have to close with prayer. We'll be in chapters 20 and 21 next week is the plan. Heavenly Father, Lord, I just thank you for giving us your word. And Lord, as we struggle with this issue of faith and Lot and how he is described in your word as a righteous man, and yet he falls so far short. And Lord, I just ask that you would help us, that we would have faith in you, and that we would seek to follow more of Abraham's example rather than Lot's, and just strengthen us in our faith as we